The Mindfulness and Grief podcast offers compassionate insights for coping with grief and life after loss. I'm Heather Stang, author of the Mindfulness and Grief book, and your host for this podcast. Welcome to episode 8. Today I'm here with Hope Zavara, a mindfulness and lifestyle expert who's here to share with us her story of love and loss and how she used practices such as yoga and mindfulness to support herself after her loss. So Hope, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Heather. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's such a pleasure to have you too, because I love this community of people who have experienced something traumatic, something awful, and then have gone on to be able to support other people through their own awful, using these very helpful tools that we have. And while, I always say none of us would have chosen that to happen, given that it did happen, here we are. And so I'm wondering if you could maybe start out with sharing, a little bit about your experience.
Absolutely. So for me, I found myself knee deep in an eating disorder at about 15 years old. And at a time in my life where I didn't think I had a problem, and there was so much social pressure, which I think so many moms can relate to, watching their teens and their adolescents go through these things. And part of it is just life struggles. My coping mechanism was food. And my coping mechanism was what I didn't realize at the time was learned behaviors from one of my parents. And so I found myself swimming in an eating disorder and really just trying to walk through my teenage years, trying to be what people call as normal as possible. And just really yo-yoing between anorexia and bulimia and the desire to want to be accepted, not only by my peers, but by my family, and more importantly, by my own self. And for anyone that has gone through something traumatic or has struggled with addiction, a lot of times it's an internal acceptance that has to cultivate in order to be able to get through that. And I didn't know that at the time. And through all of these struggles, through all of this challenge, through middle school and high school and into my early 20s, something always kept telling me, keep pushing forward, keep going. And at the suggestion of a caring soul, I found yoga. And I just want to take you back to a place, and I can still remember my very first yoga class. And for those of you out there that maybe have never tried yoga, I really want to encourage you to be open to this practice, regardless of anything that you may have heard or seen, anything like that, because for me, yoga has transformed my life. And I remember walking out of my first yoga class and stopping in the doorway with my yoga mat rolled up over underneath my arm and thinking, oh my gosh, I have no thoughts. Where every single day, what consumed me was, you're too fat, you're not thin enough, you're not good enough, punish yourself more, don't eat that, eat this, you're good, you're bad. And my mind was empty. And for anyone out there that has ever struggled with addiction or has had something traumatic happen to them, that replay button in your head feels like it never goes off. Everything you see triggers those things, those thoughts, those emotions, that time in your life. And I walked out of that room and I had no thoughts. And it was the most blissful feeling I had ever felt, because I didn't know that existed. I didn't know that space in time, in thought, was even possible. And so I always say that my Wednesday night yoga class became my weekly ritual of second chances. And those second chances eventually led me to a yoga teacher training. And that yoga teacher training became a platform for me to really start to heal and feel. Because what I found was that I was teaching these people that were coming to my classes, and interestingly enough, they were dealing with the same things that I was struggling and privately and secretly coping with and trying to deal with myself. And if you know anything about, which I know you do, Heather, and I'm sure some of the people that are listening do know anything about grief and loss and recovery, is when you start to get together with people that get it and that aren't, you're talking about loss or an eating disorder or alcoholism or whatever it is, and they're like, well, I lost my dog, or this or that, and it's like, no, you don't understand. And so I started attracting these people to my classes, and the cool thing was I was helping them mentally learn how to create that space that I had experienced, learn how to breathe and be in their bodies again. But they were also helping me heal as well, because I realized that I wasn't alone. And I just felt like that was such a powerful experience. So from that place, I opened a yoga studio. And shortly after that, I married my high school sweetheart. And to our surprise, shortly after we got married, I got pregnant. And at a time I didn't think I would be able to get pregnant because of all the damage I had done to my body. And I was so early in recovery. But that happened. That was life's plan, right? And you kind of, you have a plan, and then life has a plan, and you have to kind of go with that. And at 27 weeks pregnant, we got news no new parent should ever hear. And I can still remember that night, that moment, that place. And we were told that, I'm sorry, but your baby's not going to make it. No words can describe what I felt that day. And it's interesting because it's, almost 13 years later, and I still have that feeling of what that was like. And I've realized that I don't think that ever goes away. But on May 23rd, 2007, our tiny 2-pound daughter, Faith, was born into this world. And just 20 minutes later, died in my arms.
Yeah.
No words can describe what I felt that day. I just, for those of you that have lost a loved one, that numbness, that void, that you don't even know what to feel or how to explain what you're feeling. I remember walking out of that hospital thinking, every mom walks out with a baby, and I'm a fraud. I'm not a mom. And that process of grief, that process of learning how to live with loss really set in that moment. And for those of you that have lost someone, it's not a textbook experience. It's not you're going to go through this, and then you're going to go through this, and then you're going to go through this. It's such a raw emotion. And what yoga has taught me from working through addiction and being in recovery now for almost 15 years and losing my daughter and finding life after the loss of my daughter, what I've learned is that you have two choices. You either have to choose to live because they don't get to anymore, or you choose to die with them. And I know that might be really hard to hear, but I had to choose life because my daughter didn't get to. And so every single day after she had passed away, I had to wake up and tell myself that, and look in the morning, in the mirror in the morning, and say, I have to live because she doesn't get to. Please show me my purpose. Mm-hmm. And I started doing that every single day. And it took about 2 years to continuously say that I started to realize I have a message to share with people, that other people are going through the same things that I am, and they want to hear what I have to say. Because what I found is that I'm grateful for the loss and the tragedy and the struggle that I've been through. And I know that so many people still don't see it that way. And it is possible. And so what my daughter Faith has shown me is the hope process. It's what I call the hope process, helping others purposefully excel. And this actually came to me at a point where we always say, I have 3 children, we always say that when we see a butterfly, it's Faith saying hello. And one afternoon I was thinking about her, and I started thinking about what a butterfly means. And so I Googled it, and to my surprise, it meant hope. And so then I started meditating and thinking about what the word hope actually means. Like, why is my name Hope? Why me? Why these experiences? What is the path and purpose? And helping others purposely excel. And what I found was that I had this toolbox. I had created this toolbox through these years, through these last, 10 to 15 years at that time. And everything that I was always sharing and just finding in my own life to be successful revolved around three things. Revolved around the breath, revolved around learning to live in your body again, and revolved around your belief system. I'm not talking religion. I'm not talking you have to be a certain, but believe. What do you believe in? What is it that drives you and wakes you up every single morning? And these three things were the continuous message that I found myself sharing with other people. And that's kind of brought us together today, Heather, is this opportunity to share.
Well, let's start with that first piece, the breath. Because we so often talk about the breath in yoga and the breath in meditation. And, for those of you who've listened to this podcast, on the very first Mindfulness and Grief podcast, we had David Trelevin, who talked about trauma-sensitive mindfulness. And so for some people, breath might not be accessible, but for the majority of people, breath can be a great comfort. So I just wanted to throw that little acknowledgement that if breath doesn't work for you, I'm sure that we're going to talk about many other things, but that many of you are going to find your breath to be kind of a comfort or just at least something present. So Hope, I'll let you maybe share your take on breath and how did it help you first? And then how do you see it helping others?
Well, first of all, when I first stepped into yoga, I always tell people yoga found me. I didn't find yoga.
That's so true for so many of us, isn't it?
It just kind of falls into your lap, right?
Yeah, you go and you take, I went and took a class because I had stress and I was like, oh crap, my life just changed,
Which is a great thing, it goes back to the whole thing that, you keep following your path and it will put things in your path, in your way to be able to help you heal and move forward. But when I first found yoga, I did not realize that I was holding my breath all the time.
Oh, yeah.
I don't even think, to be honest with you, I don't even think anyone ever even told me that I was breathing. I mean, obviously, like, you're alive, you're breathing, you're moving through the day. But until that point in that first yoga class and then in my teacher training, I didn't realize that this whole breathing thing was really important. And furthermore, that you actually can control your breathing as much as it doesn't feel like. If you've ever had a panic attack or an anxiety attack, it doesn't feel like you can control your breathing. But the reality is you can. And average person breathes with about 18% of their lung capacity. I call that clavicle breathing. So it's no wonder that we have stress, we have anxiety, we have asthma. We're triggered by so many things over and over again. Now, couple that with depression, which kind of closes up our heart and our chest, which makes it even more difficult to breathe, to take a deep breath. No wonder we're in this constant cycle of fight, flight, or freeze. So to get out of that constant cycle, to get out of that sympathetic nervous system and into that parasympathetic nervous system, that state, the breath is such a great tool. And the last time I checked, it was free.
Well, in most cases, yes.
There's no orange bottle necessary. There's no prescription necessary. And the one thing the breath did for me was it really helped me learn how to feel in my body again. And those feelings I was experiencing on the mat, what I learned was I was experiencing those same feelings, that same feeling when I was in an uncomfortable pose as I was in life. Mm-hmm. So I started to see this parallel of, okay, if I can learn to breathe in this pose, in this safe place, okay, nothing's going to happen to me on this yoga mat, in this room, I started realizing I could actually teach myself how to deal with those situations off the mat. So when I was feeling the need to act in my addiction, going back to my breathing, when I would have that replay button with the loss of my daughter in my head, breathing hope, breathing like this will pass. Yeah. I realized that this was such a valuable tool for me, not to get rid of the feelings, not to push them aside, not to bury them, but to learn to have a new relationship with them. Breath was vital.
That's like hitting the nail on the head right there. Grief is about learning. I mean, you're having to relearn how to have a relationship with someone who's no longer physically here, but the relationship continues. And, when we think about breath in the body, it creates space. On that inhale creates space, on that exhale creates release. And what you're saying really underlies or underscores the idea that our yoga mat is like our laboratory to practice how do we want to be in life. On that yoga mat, you can say, I want to have some balance, some equanimity, some spaciousness. Not, again, your grief. I mean, we could see just from you sharing the story and how I felt, when you shared the story of faith, that's still here. It's still present, but there's some space around it for you to add in other things too.
Well, and I think that's a really important point. I always tell my students, your yoga mat is your incubator for your everyday life.
Oh, I like that. That's
good. The idea of the safe place to practice living again, because when you lose a loved one, that is essentially kind of what you're learning to do again. When I do grief groups and I come in and I share and we do some yoga and some mindfulness and I kind of go through a workshop type setting, one of the things that we always talk about is, who are you now?
Oh, yeah.
And it's, it's like the 13th step in the 12-step program. Like, okay, now what? And it doesn't mean that you discount what's happened, but it's kind of like, how can I allow this person to keep living on? I don't care what age they are, but how can I help having this person live on in all of their great things? Instead of dwelling on them, how can I celebrate them every day? My daughter had 20 minutes of life. That doesn't mean that she can't live on now for years and years and years and years. And for someone that maybe has never lost someone, they might not understand this, but for someone that has, they probably fully understand that I know that my daughter has given me so many more gifts in her short life than she probably would have been able to give me in a much longer one. And I know that might sound selfish, and obviously there's not a day that goes by that I don't wish that she was here, and she's very real and alive in my children's lives as well. But she pushed me into recovery. She gave me 3 beautiful other children that wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her and the life that she chose. And she pushed me into sharing my story with others. She pushed me into helping others in a different way. She pushed me into a better marriage with my husband. She pushed me into sharing her story so that others can heal in a way that she taught me how to heal. And I'm so grateful for that. And my prayer and my hope today is that those that are listening can step back and go, okay, how can I help this person that I've lost in love live on in me choosing how to live more fully in every single day? And instead of dwelling on the loss, celebrate the life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's something we talk about a lot in grief, like on grief retreats and grief organizations that I work with is the importance of celebrating the life. And, while some people won't resonate with the idea that, this is, as I often say, it's not the death that's the gift. That's not the gift. Grief is not a gift, but making meaning from that, figuring out exactly what you said. Who am I now? Who do I want to be now?
Exactly.
And you listed off some really great and surprising things. You said a better relationship with your husband, and not every marriage has that after a miscarriage or a stillbirth or the death of a child. And so I know this might be deviating a little bit, but I'm curious for the two of you, because I think this would be really helpful for people to hear. What did you two do as a couple to get to where you are now? Because that shows up all the time.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so I think initially, in all honesty, everyone around me was waiting for me to crack and crumble. And my husband, just okay, he didn't deal with an eating disorder and addiction, and just kind of, okay, whatever, he's the guy. And I did the exact opposite. I soared after her loss. And don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean that I didn't spend countless days in bed crying and that empty feeling. But eventually I decided to pick myself up and start living again. And interestingly enough, just to be very honest with you, my husband didn't really process the grief very well in the beginning. He kind of did the man thing, and I'm not trying to stereotype, just kind of like, okay, deal with it, got to go back to work and move on. And here I am on my yoga mat crying and sobbing for days and weeks and months and years, and, kind of reliving that process and learning to heal and learning to live again and be who I am now. And he didn't really do that until probably a couple of years later. We had our first son, Harper, just a little over a year after she had passed. And I always explain it to people, when I had my first son, Harper, we were both numb. And it was like, here's this baby in our arms, live, we're happy, we're thrilled that he's healthy, but we felt nothing. And I mean nothing, because all we had to go off of was tragedy. Right. And experiencing what normal people feel like is joy and excitement. And we're like, well,
there's that fear, right, that comes with each loss. Like I know, myself included, and many people I talk to, and what you're sharing, it's like, well, the last time we had a baby.
Exactly.
And how could it be any different? And in terms, of course, that was your experience, I wish it weren't, but that was your experience. And so I imagine it took a little bit of time to kind of believe. And I mean, granted, we know, and everybody listening knows there are no guarantees.
Exactly. And we were told, initially we were told it was a 1 in 4 chance that our children would happen again. And then we were told it was a 1 in a million chance that this had happened to our daughter. And she had polycystic kidney disease and multiple other issues. And so each time it was kind of like
that's that breath thing again.
Yeah. But the relationship between my husband and I, it was like, okay, I wanted to have another child. And he was like, I don't know. And so we just kind of were like, okay, we'll just see what happens. And when we had our son Harper, it was like this reconnection for the two of us to come together to support this life that needed us unconditionally. And I'm not by any means saying go have another child after you lose a child, because everybody is different. But what ended up happening for the two of us was like, okay, we have to come together. We have to put ourselves aside a little bit and support this being. And my husband, who had closed himself off and thrown himself into his work, started to revamp a little bit his life, and we started to communicate more fully. And he kind of watched me pick my pieces up in my life again, and kind of was like, hey, don't leave me behind. Mm-hmm. I kind of want that freedom and that lightness that you're feeling now. And how do I do that? And so it was this slow process over time. And then we had our second daughter 2 years later, and we were a little less numb. And I was telling people, it was kind of like I think I'm excited. And then we had my son 3.5 years later, or 3.5 years ago. And it was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And we were like so joyous and so excited and so happy. And the relationship with my husband and I through all that just continued to build. But here's the interesting thing, and it's so timely having this podcast with you, Heather, because my daughter's anniversary of her birth and her moving forward in life was May 23rd of this past year. And we always pull open her book and we look at everything and we share it with the kids, and we kind of have like a night of just celebration. And he says to me after my kids go to bed, he goes, Hope, I don't think I ever processed losing her. Wow. And because I had said, it feels so real still, but I've come so far. And he goes, I don't think I really ever understood what grief even felt like. And for him to say that, and for him, we had this conversation about grief, and we had this conversation about how when you lose someone, I always like to say to myself, there's this hole in your heart. And when you lose someone, you have to decide then to just plant new seeds, and something beautiful grows from that soil. it's not that you have to like forget about that hole in your heart and kind of turn your back on it, but plant something beautiful there. And so we had this great conversation about, life and moving forward and purpose. And I guess for the two of us, we kind of came to the understanding is, we don't have to grieve alone, that we can grieve differently, but we don't have to grieve alone, and respecting each other in the way that we grieve, because I think that's hard as a woman. It's like, you don't understand me. I don't understand you. Why are you crying all the time? I don't want to hug you right now or whatever. And just understanding that we grieve differently, but supporting each other, and that I don't care if it's 20 years later, that we still support each other and we have an understanding that it's okay. And I think that's important for couples to realize, because I know so many people that the loss of a child has ruined their marriage, and I wouldn't mean ruin, that's not the right word, but broken up their marriage because of the lack of understanding and connection between grieving or not grieving at all.
Well, when you think about, just the irritability that comes with grief, which in a relationship without loss, a relationship where there isn't a death, you can still get irritated with people, right? I mean, that's the thing about a close relationship. And so that mindful attitude of honoring, respecting, this is how you're grieving, this is how I'm grieving, but we can still love and care for each other and not put those demands that you need to grieve the way I grieve, which whether it's a husband or wife or partners,
anything. Yeah.
Or, and siblings too. We see that so often with siblings, where you could have 5 siblings, they all grieve differently. And if there isn't care and respect there, it can really break apart a family, at least for a period of time. And so that really is mindfulness in relationship, isn't it?
It is. And I think the understanding of, and this is where yoga and breathing and that second B, learning to be in the body, comes in, where it's, I need to respect him and how he processes this, and also open myself physically to being loved when I don't think I'm worthy of love, because losing a child, it's like, I'm broken, it's me, what did I do wrong? Right. And letting him love me and letting him wrap his arms around me and tell me that it's going to be okay, and receiving that, and equally to him, that whole like being in your body and being in your skin after you've lost someone, I think is so critical. And that feeling word, that F word comes up, that feeling word. And that was what, for me, when I lost my daughter, moving forward, played such a pivotal role in specific Yin Yoga, because you're holding those poses and you're breathing, and all of a sudden all these feelings start coming up, and you have to feel again, and then they pass, and then more come up, and some things are correlating to the pose, some things aren't. And one thing I learned, very, very, very powerful, one thing that I learned was that all things pass.
Yeah.
And if I can say anything about yoga or qigong or tai chi or whatever it is that you would maybe choose to do, is one, to find a mindfulness practice, but 2, make sure you slow down enough to feel. Because especially with grief, it's like, throw yourself back into life, go running, go do this, all this stuff. But sometimes we need to slow down in order to speed up. And by slowing down, yoga really showed me, okay, Hope, you need to slow down enough that you can start feeling. And I didn't find Yin Yoga till about 4 years after I lost my daughter. And I didn't realize how much I still hadn't processed, how much still was caught in my body, in my hips, in my back, in my neck and shoulders. And that releasing and that forgiveness that came from that was unexplainable.
Yeah, and it is unexplainable. Like, you could try to describe how yoga helps you with grief, but until somebody tries it, the body responds to grief as this huge stress reaction. And like you said, we hold our emotions. They often say the issues are in the tissues, right?
Yeah.
And I love Yin Yoga. I actually will do that from time to time. And, that's a yoga where you do hold the postures for an extended period of time, as we do in Phoenix Rising Yoga. And you're using gravity to help with the stretch.
And it's mainly floor-based postures.
And it's lovely.
So and spine. I always tell people, there's 10 times more proprioceptors in your fascia than there is in your muscle. So that time, that gift of time, really helps unlock that emotion that is often stuck in the biggest filing cabinet we have, which is our bodies.
Right.
And if you've gone through loss or you're dealing with grief, what is your outlet? What are you doing to unload so that you're not carrying around all this stuff and then expecting to perform optimally in life and have healthy relationships with your spouse or your children or your friends? We all need a dumping ground, just to be really, kind of frank. We all need a dumping ground, and yoga is such a safe place to do that and learn how to live in the body again. And for me, it was to learn how to love my body again. And I thought that after, going into recovery, I had kind of learned to love my body again. And then my daughter really kind of showed me all the nooks and crannies of like, okay, Hope, what about this? Okay, Hope, what about this? So I had all these other gifts she started giving me to really push me into recovery, which I don't think I would have if her life wouldn't have been the way it was. So that kind of leads me to the third B, the whole belief. What do you believe? What is up here in this thing we call a mind? What are you directing your focus and attention to? And it can be so overwhelming when you lose a loved one, because that's all you're thinking about. That's all that consumes you. You see their favorite chair, you see their clothes, you go to a location that you had always gone to with them, or you smell a smell and it brings you back. And rerouting the mind and really learning how to see life maybe in a slightly different lens can be so healing and transformative, and at the same time also honoring what you're feeling at that time. And so my belief system really played a huge role in that. And not so much about, like I said, it's not religion. It's rather thinking more positive and thinking more purposefully and realizing that I am not my thoughts, and I am not forever my feelings, that this is just a blip in time, and to honor them. And like I said, all things pass, remembering that in those moments where it's just like, I can't take it anymore. This is too much. This too will pass.
Yeah. And like, just you saying that I can't take it anymore, that sense of overwhelm, while yoga and meditation, they're not going to take away the loss. That's there, but they can help reduce some of the intensity of what you're feeling in the moment, so you can catch your breath, so you can breathe, so you can think a little clearer, so you can answer that question, now what?
Exactly.
It's like your whole plans have been shattered. I mean, you plan to go home from the hospital with a baby, and you don't, now what? And not that you're going to answer that day, but your now what is, I'm going to live my life in a way that supports other mothers or other parents through this really hard time. That's your meaning making. And we so often talk in the thanatology world, about how the importance of meaning making after a loss, which could come years down the road, right? It probably won't knock on your door 3 months later. Maybe it will. I don't know. I don't want to say it won't, but
I think that
comes later.
Yeah, I think that's the key too, Heather, is not expecting it to happen at a certain time. It's kind of the grief timeline. I should be doing this, and it's kind of like when someone breaks their arm. You should be back to work in 6 weeks, or hurts their back. Insurance says this should happen at this time. And I said this in a grief group that I did about 6 months ago, and I was telling these ladies, grief never stops. You never stop grieving. Stop telling yourself that by 5 years you're going to be done grieving, or at this time you're going to be done grieving. It just transforms. It changes. It evolves. And grief gets less sad and heavy, and grief gets a little bit more like, like when I see that butterfly and I think, it's my daughter. Like, thank you for coming to say hi to me today. And it makes me smile and have tears of joy rather than tears of sadness and emptiness. And even now I'm like getting emotional, but it's not heavy, sad, just like I'm empty, tears. It's like purposeful and meaningful. And that's the beauty of grief. And I think now in my life, if you never grieve, wow, you have missed out on an experience in your life that is unexplainable. Mm-hmm. I feel like it has made me more receptive, more relatable. It has helped me be more compassionate. It has helped me be more understanding, more forgiving, more loving. And I would not be that way if it wasn't for grief.
And that's that principle of post-traumatic growth, that we are changed, and that compassion piece you said. I mean, that so often the person who says something unkind to us when we're grieving is the person who has not yet experienced a big loss. And so it's not really their fault. They just don't know any better, right? But once you've experienced it, when you meet somebody who shares their loss, you're just like, yeah, yeah, there's no particular words that are going to that even need to be said.
I 100% agree.
It's just here we are in this crazy experience of love and loss.
And I feel like at this point in my life, I like to always pose the question to people, and I always tell them, it's okay if you're resistant to hearing this right now, but just remember it. So maybe 3 months, 3 years, 30 years later, it's like, oh yeah, I remember someone said that to me. Grief can be a gift.
Yeah.
And that whole thing that we were talking about of, why did this happen? I used to ask myself, why did this happen to me? Please, universe, please, my creator, show me why. Show me a reason. There has to be something for you to take this small child and have her only have 20 minutes of life. There has to be a reason for that. Otherwise, the world is just cruel and cold. So please show me a reason. And I've been shown tens of thousands of reasons. And so ask, and be open to what comes. You have to take the blinders off of wanting something specific and open yourself up to what could come, because it could be anything.
Wow. Thank you for sharing yourself and for sharing your wisdom, your journey, your 3 B's: breathe, body, believe. Did I get it right?
You did.
Okay, good. So Hope, if people want to hear more from you, where do they find you?
Absolutely. So you can find me at hopezavara.com. That's Zvara. I know it's a weird last name. And you can check out my blog, and I have other podcasts and my events coming up on there, as well as if you're on social media, I am on Facebook and Instagram. And on Facebook, you can friend me, and I do a daily dose of hope. And so it's a very unscripted, raw video each day. I try to do it every day, just kind of sharing my journey and my thoughts and inspiring moments with other people, because like we've kind of talked about today, life gives us so many opportunities to connect and to share, and that one sharing moment could be the difference between someone feeling as though they can't move on and the difference between them not moving on and moving on.
Yeah.
And so that's just, another way for me to be able to share that hope for people in their lives. But yeah, definitely, go to my website, check out. I have an online yoga studio, mindful movement. I have some great courses. One of my favorite is my Clearing Mental Clutter course. And it was actually created because of my recovery process and my grief process. And I kind of created a program that basically mirrored what I had gone through to get where I am today, and kind of making it accessible for other people.
That sounds wonderful. So for those of you watching, you can see the web address popping up on the screen right now. For those of you right there, that's great. And for those of you who are listening, you can hop over to mindfulnessandgrief.com, and you will, if you click on the podcast link, you will get the show notes for today's episode, and you'll have links in there to Hope's website and her social media and all that good stuff. So Hope, do you want to close us out with any final thoughts?
My final thought, if I could leave you all with one thing, and thank you so much for listening to this entire podcast and sharing this time with Heather and I. It's been a true pleasure. But if I could leave you with anything, it's to remember that no matter how hard it gets, to never lose hope. If you're still alive and you're still breathing, there's still hope and there's still purpose. And please don't ever forget that.
Thank you so much, Hope Svara. I really am grateful for the time. Namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you for joining us for the Mindfulness and Grief podcast. If you found the information helpful, please help others find us by rating, reviewing, or subscribing to this podcast wherever you download your favorite shows. For additional grief support, including free guided meditations, visit us on the web at mindfulnessandgrief.com and consider adding the Mindfulness and Grief book to your self-care toolkit. Special thanks to our sound engineer, Todd Campbell of Hub City Recording, and to the Atomic Mosquitoes for our theme music. I'm Heather Stang, and I hope these teachings will be of great benefit to all who receive them. Until next time, namaste.